Major Pain is back after a month-long hiatus. Andy and I went on our honeymoon. We had an absolutely incredible time, and I'm so excited to be back with an incredible episode for you today with Steve. Before we get to that, just a couple of announcements. Our last episode was announcing the Undiagnosed Disease Fund. Andy and I have raised over $9,000 as our wedding registry to purchase genetic testing for 3 individuals. And we went on our honeymoon and have gotten a few applicants while we were gone. So for the moment, we are going to pause taking new applications as we review the ones that we have. And I will absolutely be updating you on this podcast when people are chosen. But we're both just so thrilled to be doing this and really, really excited to talk to the people that we've had applications from so far. If you are someone who just watches the podcast on YouTube, you would have missed that last episode. It was audio only, but you can find it on the Major Pain podcast feed on all major podcasting platforms. Andy and I will be recounting the entirety of our honeymoon adventures on a bonus episode of Major Pain. And actually, while we were on our honeymoon, we recorded a bonus episode about our wedding that we actually recorded in a hotel room in Jamaica, which was super, super fun. Those bonus episodes are available to everyone who supports this podcast on Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/majorpainpodcast. We've actually had 2 new people sign up as Patreon supporters while we were on our honeymoon. So extra special thank you to Assam and to Bronwyn, who is actually our wedding photographer. Thank you both so much for the incredible support of Major Pain. And if you're not a Patreon subscriber, but you're interested in checking out the bonus podcast, there's a new feature on Patreon where I can make those bonus podcasts available for one-time purchase. So if you want to check out an individual episode, you can do so. I've made them $3 each on Patreon. Coming back from the honeymoon, both of my new jobs have been so busy. And this is amazing. I mean, I am just so lucky and grateful that I am healthy enough now to be able to work. And I'm pushing up into working full time at this point, which is an incredible thing that I never thought I'd hear myself say. As that's happening, I'm having a lot less time to work on this podcast outside of work. So I would like to put out the call for some help. If you are a content creator, particularly an audio editor, I would love to start building a team to produce this podcast, at least during the busy months while I have so much else going on in life. So if you have interest in being a part of the team, if you have content creation skills that you think would help produce Major Pain, please reach out to me, majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. That being said, my schedule is very full right now, and I'm not 100% sure how consistent I will be able to get the show out over the next month throughout the holiday season, as things are so busy, not just with work, but with the holidays, with family stuff. I have always strived to be super consistent, putting the podcast out once a week, and there's been a couple of occasions where I've missed that over the years. In the past, it's always been due to unexpected health flare-ups, so I'm thrilled that we're at this place where it's because I might be working too much. But I will just ask for your patience if I miss a week of the show over the next month or so. Major Pain is made possible by the support of our listeners. There are several great ways to support this podcast. Thank you so much to everyone who signed up on Rare Patient Voice over the last month. And as I've already mentioned, our new Patreon supporters, it is so incredibly helpful. And of course, our Patreon producers, Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. If you'd like to learn more about how to support this podcast, all of the information is on our website, majorpainpodcast.com/support. And the last thing I'll say before we jump into today's incredible episode with Steve is that I am not a medical professional. Please do not take any medical action based off what you hear on this podcast without first consulting your doctor.
How lucky it is just to get through a day without pain.
If you look at me, it doesn't appear that I have a disability.
A test that comes back abnormal, it's like, yes, we're onto something here.
Welcome to Major Pain. I'm your host, Jesse Mercury, and this week I'm joined by my guest, Steve. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jesse, thank you so much. I welcome the opportunity to share my ills and woes and hopefully inspire a few people along the way.
Fantastic. I have to start out by thanking you. I have rescheduled on you so many times. I just got married on Monday. We're recording this on the Thursday after my wedding. This won't come out until after my honeymoon, so it's going to be a minute till people hear it. But I had to reschedule on you several times as the wedding was approaching. I just got, you just don't know. Until you get married, you don't know what's involved in prepping for a wedding. And I just had so much to do. So I just really have to thank you for your flexibility. But I'm so excited to get to know you today and to hear your story. Before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit. So, Steve, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm an OU alumni. Live here in the center of Oklahoma in a small suburb called Edmond, which Route 66 runs straight through Edmond. Don't know if you're familiar with the historic road, but it connected the U.S. way back nearly 100 years ago. Was one of the major thoroughfares. Happy to be here. Have a great life in Edmond. I'm just a super happy guy, very active despite my ails, and love to cycle, love to get outdoors, hang out with my golden doodle, and do podcasts, share my story with the world.
Amazing, very cool. Yeah, and you've mentioned your ails a couple times, and it's got me real curious. So I have to ask, Steve, what is your major pain?
Oh man. Well, first let me say that I'm coming off a flare-up. My disease is prone to flare-ups, and particularly when weather runs through. And we had a major storm move through the last couple of days, and my body acts like a barometer. A day or two before the storm comes, I start to flare up, and it's all due to a disease called arachnoiditis. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this one before. It's it's fairly rare, and you're faced with a lifetime of difficulty when your neurologist comes in with your MRI results. He hangs his head and just says, "I'm sorry," because you're in for a lifetime of pain. It's excruciating. I've had pretty much any given pill that you can name that was a narcotic. I've had it. I quit all of them at one time, cold turkey. It was against medical advice, but I am pill-free with the exception of prednisone that I use because it'll cross the blood-brain barrier and it will reduce the inflammation. And just to give you a little bit of backstory on arachnoiditis, it's chronic inflammation of the arachnoid tissue, which surrounds the spinal cord. It comes and goes. You can either live with it and not have any pain, or you can be where I'm at, which mine is progressive. Slowly paralyzing me below the waist. Wow. And it's primarily contained to one part of my body, which is in my right foot, but I'm starting to get signs that it's starting to edge over to my left foot. And that's probably not something I'm looking forward to, because I remember, when it happened, the slow progression to get where I'm at today. But I tell you what, if anybody was to have this disease that could tolerate it and deal with the pain, it's me, because I've been through a lifetime of pain with everything that I've had to deal with getting up to this point in life.
Wow. You've already said several things that I have to ask more about. But first of all, I've never heard someone describe themselves as a very happy person and then say, I also have like a horrible intractable pain disease with arachnoiditis. We did an episode a while back with Holly on adhesive arachnoiditis. Is there a difference between this and that, or is it the same thing?
It's basically the same thing, and it depends on the diagnosis. Adhesive arachnoiditis basically says that your nerves get kind of real gunky. It's almost like if you cook spaghetti and you don't stir it up and it clumps together. That's arachnoiditis, and mine is in my lumbar spine, where you have the cauda equina, which is the horse's tail, where all the nerves kind of flare out and they look like spaghetti, and they're slowly starting to clump together. And that's really where the pain comes, because it's an ebb and flow. You'll get inflammation, and then it'll retract, and then you'll get more inflammation. It's just a chronic cycle of just trying to deal with it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So those nerves are starting to clump together. And I mean, this is one of those diseases, from my understanding, that doctors just have no idea why this happens and can't really help once it starts to happen, or why it happens for some people and not others. I mean, there is evidence to point to things like a lumbar puncture, any sort of trauma in the low back can kick this off. But once it's kicked off, they just don't know what to do. In your case, what happened? When did this start, and how did this start?
Mine basically, I think the root cause initially was I was in a traumatic accident in 1982. I had a tree fall on me.
Oh my God.
It crushed my face.
What?
Bruised my heart. crushed my left wrist, literally exploded 3 lumbar vertebrae, L3, 4, or 5.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was left paralyzed for a period of months in the hospital, slowly regained the ability to walk and got most all my function and feeling back. Went on to make history in the sport of triathlon. I was the second disabled athlete to have ever completed a triathlon. So
wow.
I'm a pioneer in the sport, which is now an Olympic sport. So I guess you could say I'm a pioneer of a Paralympic sport,
Wow.
which is kind of cool. I'm writing a book about that.
Oh wow. I'm sorry. I'm a little speechless. I've been doing this podcast for years, and this is the first time I've talked to someone where a tree fell on them. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Are you just like walking down the street and a tree falls down? Is it during a storm? I mean, what happened?
No, I was living in the country on my grandmother's farm. My grandfather just passed away, and I was cutting firewood to make a little bit of extra money. And the tree did what they call a barber chair, which is when a tree, it basically splits in half and it forms a T. And as we were cutting on this part here, the two halves basically slammed together on me. So it caught me from the front and the back, pinned me to the ground.
Oh,
I was paralyzed immediately. Was stuck in the tree for roughly 2 hours before help could come and get me out. And this is literally in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a wheat field with this little wooded area. So in 1982, medicine not being what it is, no GPS, no cell phones, it was just a calamity of errors, but everything worked out to my benefit. So yeah, it was a freak accident.
Wow. I'm already just like, how are you such a positive person? Because I just met you, but I can feel your positivity, and I don't remember really anyone really describing themselves as I'm just like a really joyful, happy person. That's such a rare way to describe yourself. Yeah. And you've already talked about a couple of really horrific things that you've lived through, and you alluded to the fact that you've had a life of many pains. How do you stay positive?
Well, I mean, I've been dealing with this since I was 20. I'm now 62, so 42 years. And what I've really come to realize is that when you're faced with adversity, whether it's physical, mental, financial, you name it, you have two choices. You can either rise above it or you can succumb to it. And pretty much every time life has been, life adversity has hit me, I've chosen to rise above it. I push myself as hard as I can, knowing that arachnoiditis is not going to kill me, but it will shorten my life. So I'm just really trying to make the most of it. Did a 5K a week ago with my sister. With my forearm crutches. I was the only guy with forearm crutches, and I was smiling the whole way. And I've got a 37-mile bike ride down Route 66 for an event called Cycle 66 this weekend. And unfortunately, it's going to be in the pouring rain. I don't know if I'm going to be in a flare-up. Most likely I will be. But the one time that I'm literally pain-free is when I'm on my bike and I'm spinning. So,
wow.
Yeah. And I mean, I would not give up my bike for anything. That's my happy place.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible. Okay. So you're working on chopping some firewood in 1982. Are you up in the tree and chopping wood when this happens?
No, I mean, ironically enough, my friend was cutting on the tree. I was standing back from it about 10 or 15 feet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but literally, and I mean, I could put my hand on a Bible and swear to this. I looked up at this tree, and the last thought that went through my head was how bad it would hurt if somebody got caught between those two halves. So it was almost like it was foretold. And the next thing I knew, I'm waking up, my head's spinning, I'm seeing stars, I'm spitting teeth out, I got blood pouring out of my forehead, my mouth. I'm pinned in this tree, I can barely breathe. And then I realized as I feel down towards my legs, because the tree was massive and I've got it bearing down straight on my legs. I can't feel anything. So I realized, hey, I'm paralyzed, which is, that's a pretty big revelation.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. And does your friend then go to get help and you're just stuck here?
It was a series of mishaps. The chainsaw we had that he was using to try to cut the front half off to free me, it got stuck. We had no other chainsaw with us. He went to start my grandfather's, I think it was like a 56 Chevy, older pickup, 3-speed on the column, very particular. It flooded. So he ended up having to run 2 miles to find help.
Wow.
And yeah, got my uncle's farm hand, grabbed a chainsaw, made it out there. They ended up cutting me out and just keeping me pressed up against the half that was to my back because they knew that I had a spinal cord injury, not being able to feel my leg. So they held me in position until somehow, I think it was the Army Corps of Engineers were around that area. They flagged them down. They had a radio and they radioed into town and got an ambulance out our way. But, there were no street signs. There was no way to direct them other than to say, it's near the White's house. And, it's just south of that and, in the middle of a wheat field. So it was just a calamity of things that happened. I shouldn't have survived, but, part of the reason I smile is that every day thereafter has just been a gift for me.
During that time where you are stuck waiting for help and you know that you're paralyzed, did you have a moment of thinking you were going to die? Did you face your mortality?
No, I was very stoic. There were no tears. There was no boo-hoo, woe is me, nothing like that. I just was ready to get out of this position and, get into a hospital where I knew that I could get the care that I needed. But yeah, it was just, and maybe it was because, my grandfather had just died. He and I were very close. He raised me for a good period of time of my life on the farm. And maybe I felt his presence. I really don't know. But it was not like I was worried. I just knew that things were going to happen.
Wow. So obviously you made it through. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the recovery process. You talked about getting your functionality back. What did that all look like?
It was grueling.
Yeah.
I was on copious amounts of morphine. They were giving it to me IM in my legs, and my legs just, because I couldn't move them, I was stationary in the hospital for roughly 3.5 months. I remember one time my legs had atrophied to the point where when they went to give me a shot, they went down to bone and it actually bent the needle. And, they pulled it out. There were no pain pumps back then. It was all pretty much through an injectable. But I remember doing therapy in my bed. And so because I had my cast on my left wrist was broken, the minute they gave me the trapeze bar over the bed, and they gave me the go-ahead that I could start lifting myself up, I started doing chin-ups. I'd do 1 or 2, and we would do physical therapy. And I would always time my physical therapy with a morphine shot so that I could push myself hard through the therapy because it was very, very painful.
Wow.
So, get a few tricks. And I was lying prone looking at the ceiling. I knew every spot on that ceiling after 3.5 months, trust me.
Wow. And through that whole time, did you just expect to be paralyzed the rest of your life?
Well, initially they told me that I was going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. And what I told them, this was in the emergency room on that first day, was that I was going to walk out of that hospital. And so through all my therapy, I pushed and pushed and pushed. And on the day that I was released, I took 4 steps on my own with a pair of crutches, and I've got a picture of it. I weighed 150 pounds going in. I weighed less than 90 coming out of that hospital.
Wow.
But it was all under my own power. And, I knew that I was going to walk. I was not going to give in to the fact that I was going to be in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. Ironically enough, I do have a wheelchair now that I use from time to time, along with my forearm crutches. But, now it's kind of a sense of pride that I can get into it when I need to. I'm not embarrassed by it. It's just a necessary thing that get me from point A to point B as quickly and most efficiently as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I got a diagnosis, I was using a wheelchair, and, I have very fond feelings towards wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. And it was a very emotional thing for me to just get married and be able to, I walked down the aisle and I danced all night, and it was not even a question as to whether or not I'd be able to do that on my feet. Yeah. Where years ago, it was like, wow, am I going to not be able to do that, But at the same time, the wheelchair is what gave me mobility, and it gave me back my life leading up into getting a diagnosis. So yeah, there is an interesting societal stigma against wheelchairs. And then there's a very real thing of being the person who uses one and maybe wants to work towards being able to get by without it. And in both of our cases, that is something that was on our minds. But that's an individualized journey. there are many people for whom the wheelchair is the best option, throughout their entire lives. And that is great. The stigma against that really bothers me, having had some experience now where it's like, yeah, people need to do what's right for them. And there needs to not be a external labeling on whether or not that is good or bad. It just needs to be what is, because it's an incredible tool.
Yeah, especially if you're a walker and you use a wheelchair. That's another stigma that, wow, this guy can walk. Why is he not walking? And really what it comes down to, again, is the most efficient mode for me to get from point A to point B without suffering and without having to get there and sit and suffer as a result of having to walk, because I was afraid of what somebody else was thinking. I don't care what anybody thinks anymore. I just go out there and live my life. And, I do it with a smile on my face, because when people hear my story and I'm able to talk to them and tell them everything that I can still do despite all the pain that I'm in, they're like, wow. I mean, it's just a jaw dropper. And I don't do it for that effect, but I'm happy that, life has given me the opportunity to do that for so many people. And that's my true purpose, I think.
Well, I mean, the people watching the video version of this podcast will know that you dropped my jaw earlier.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's already happened to me today.
There's still more to come.
Yeah. Okay. So what's next? You get out of the hospital, you take a few steps. What's the process like after that?
Well, I was in a rehab center in Okmulgee. And the ironic thing about that is that it was some old Quonset huts that were used to house German prisoners during World War II in the middle of Oklahoma, in the middle of the U.S., because it was going to be impossible to escape. So, and the funny thing is that 2 years after I left that rehab center, which I was there for about 3.5 months, they condemned these buildings. They were so horrible. But yeah, I get out and, I'm still in extreme amount of pain. I'm on a handful of pills a day. I had, muscle relaxer. I had Valium. I had painkillers. I mean, you name it, I was on it. And I got to the point where my pain was so bad while I was sitting up that they gave me a belly cart to roll around in. And I don't know if you know what a belly cart is, but it's basically a gurney with big wheelchair wheels with pusher rims on it. And then you have small caster wheels in the back, and you basically lay prone and you can roll yourself. And I got so fast on that thing that the nurses would see me screaming down the hallway, and they would say, "Mr. Lovelace, you've got to stop. You're going to hurt yourself." And I'm like, no more than I've already been hurt. Trust me. This is a cakewalk by comparison. But I pushed myself through that rehab center. When I got out, I was still not able to really shuffle across the floor using a cane or using my crutches. And I was basically left to my own devices where, I pushed myself outside the rehab center. When I got back home, I had some weights that I was lifting. I got my old bench press back. And, first I started with the bar, then I added 5 pounds and 10 pounds, and I got up to, the heavy weights, and I rebuilt my body on my own. It was no small task. Ended up getting off all the pills. Which was good, because then I had clarity in life again, and I wasn't going to be one of those guys that was going to be dependent on the medication, though they do have a place in life for when you really suffer and they can make a difference. But for me, they were just holding me back. It was a boat anchor.
Wow. Is that because it made you drowsy or just not fully yourself?
Yeah, I remember I started back in college a year after I got out of the hospital. And I was still on pills. I remember taking a Percocet during an algebra test. And I'm sitting there and I got my hand here and I'm doing my numbers and I'm slowly feeling that Percocet just kick in. And I just remember waking up at the end of that test and the instructors looking at me and everybody else around me was gone out of the classroom. And I'm just in a daze. And this was probably before, they would have any kind of an inkling that, this guy's on pills or he's doing something. But that stuck with me. That moment stuck with me. And I did not want to be that guy. I did not want to be dependent on that stuff. So it was at that point that I really started to wean myself off and ended up taking Excedrin, extra strength Excedrin for many, many years to deal with sciatic nerve pain that I had as a residual. And that pain was, and I lived with that until probably 2000 when I had another back surgery. I had a spine fluid leak, and they had to go in and pull the hardware out, which anytime you have a spinal fusion, the hardware really only needs to be in place for 6, 8, 12 weeks approximate while that bone fuses. Then it's really pointless, but it's a bigger risk to go in and get it out. In my case, however, it was causing me to have that spine fluid leak. So they had to go in and get it out. And shortly after that surgery is when I started feeling the inkling of pain from the arachnoiditis. It was caused, I think, as a result of that. It basically exacerbated it. And it first started off in my toe. And, the pain from arachnoiditis for me is like stepping on a bed of nails and being shocked with an ice pick going straight up the shaft of the toe. And it's just constant. It won't quit. It's excruciating at times. So yeah, it's just one of those things you got to deal with.
Wow. So yeah, the arachnoiditis doesn't even start until this surgery years later. But that's a fascinating thing to think about, is that this one occurrence, this one, thing that happens to you when you're 20 years old just reverberates throughout the course of your life. And having that hardware taken out, it sounds like there really wasn't a choice. I've had a spinal fluid leak, and I know that the headache that goes with that is just horrendous. And if the hardware is, involved in that and it's got to go, it's got to go.
Yeah.
But then it sounds like once that's gone, then the nerves start to bunch up, and then arachnoiditis kicks off. And it's just amazing to think about how you're on this journey, and this one thing that happens to you on one day of your life reverberates across the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's like a ripple, right? They just keep going out and making an impact. But it was after that surgery, maybe, 10 years or so, I had the good fortune to sit across from my neurosurgeon that did that back surgery, the hardware removal. And the way he described my back was, and I asked him, I said, so what did you think going into the surgery? He just kind of rolled his eyes and he said, I was really afraid that I was going to open you up and that I was never going to get you closed, because my fecal sac was so thin, the dura had spread so thin that he said he just kept fixing leaks, one after another, after another, after another. Finally, he got me fixed, but he said it looked like a hand grenade had gone off in the middle of my back. There was just nothing that was recognizable as regular anatomy. And he did tell me at that point in time that my nerves were all clumped together. And he told me that he did his best to clean them off, to get all that gunky stuff off the nerves. And what I come to find out when I started doing research on arachnoiditis after I had my diagnosis, which was 2014, that's a huge no-no. That will send it into outer space. And that's pretty much what happened to me. Is it just started happening, and then it started happening more frequently. And it was like a sine wave. And the wave just got tighter and tighter as the frequency of the flare-up started to happen. And the pain now is pretty constant. I'm never away from it. I'm feeling it right now. But I'm having a good day. I have basically 3 types of days: good days, bad days, and survival days. And on the good days and the bad days, I can do pretty much anything I want to. I just have to know that I'm going to be in pain. I just have to deal with it. The survival days, I hunker down, and I can go days without sleep because sitting is extremely painful. Laying is immensely painful. Standing, which my legs are relatively weak and very painful at that point. So I'm constantly back and forth between sit, lay, stand, just to survive. And I can go 72 hours plus without sleep.
Wow. Yeah. That must be so frustrating. I mean, it sounds like your doctor really cared about you and was trying to do the right thing, but maybe was unaware that cleaning off those nerves could cause them to bunch together. Is that a conversation that you've had with this doctor since then? No,
I mean, back then we really didn't know about arachnoiditis. I mean, when I got diagnosed in 2014, I started looking for the term on Google, and it was very, very sparse. Yeah. Now it's everywhere. We talk about it more frequently. There's a Dr. Forrest Tennant, who is kind of the guru of arachnoiditis, and he gives us all these great formulas and recipes for medicine that can help. But truly, it's a very individual journey. And, you know, the medicine that may help one won't do anything for somebody else. Like myself with all the painkillers, I was just a zombie and I still had the pain. So why be a zombie? And why not just learn how to deal with the pain? So I started eating healthy, started exercising, which is beneficial. Got a pet because pets are very beneficial from a low stress standpoint. And even Force Tenet says, hey, if you have a pet that dog or cat or you know, whatever you have for 30 minutes a day, it has benefits to it. So yeah, you just have to figure out what is going to fit into your whatever hole you have and, you know, to get through life.
Yeah, totally. Holly also mentioned Dr. Tennant. That's a really good resource.
Yeah,
I did a little bit of looking after recording with Holly a while back and read a little bit about Dr. Tennant. Definitely an amazing resource for people with arachnoiditis. And, you know, it's frustrating to have a disease where there's one guy, right? Where there's like only one person who's really kind of leading the way. Right. But at least there's one guy. There's two ways to look at it. You know, at least there's somebody who is in the know and is trying to spread that information. So from 2010 to 2014, the surgery was 2010, diagnosis 2014. There must have been 4 years of just horrific pain with no understanding as to why it was happening.
Yes. And, you know, that's when my life really, really started to change. At the time, I was a salesman in the medical device industry. And so I did a lot of traveling. What I figured out was sitting in a car was like just self-torture. Yeah. If I had to go from, you know, Tulsa to Oklahoma City, I knew that I was going to be in pain for an hour and a half and then even more on the backside of that trip. But I was traveling Oklahoma and Kansas. So I was covering a lot of ground in the car. And again, I would have good days and I would have bad days and I would have survival days. But, you know, I started missing family functions. You know, family would go out to Christmas and I would wake up in a flare up, knowing that I could not go sit in the car because when I got there, I would be in so much pain that I would be miserable. I wouldn't be able to take part and I would be more of a distraction for the happy holiday. Yeah. And so, you know, it became more and more frequent. And that's really when I realized that arachnoiditis, as tough as it is on the individual, you learn how to deal with that pain, but everybody else on the outside, they can do absolutely nothing to help you. And it affects them more than anything else. And that's really kind of when the demise of my most recent marriage started to happen. I wasn't the same guy. Pain will change you in so many ways. But it was then that I really started to figure out, you know, how to deal with it. Had another course with medication. They put me on 1,800 milligrams of gabapentin a day. I was on buprenorphine, naloxone, which is what they give people that are addicted to opioids. That was a horrible drug. It sent me into a huge dark depression. I was on Valium for several years, and that's one of the most addictive drugs you can be on. And the fallout from stopping those medications was that I ended up suffering withdrawals for basically a year and a half. But, you know, I pushed through it knowing that if I get on the backside of this and I look back at the journey that I was on, I will never go back. And so far I haven't. I mean, it's been almost 10 years since I've had a pain pill, with the exception of, you know, my prednisone that I take.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So was getting diagnosed with arachnoiditis a relief in some ways to finally understand why this intractable pain was not going away?
It was until my neurologist, you know, hung his head and just said, I'm sorry. And that's when I figured out that, you know, there is no cure. There's no research being done to find a cure or anything that will actually help us. And I got a bonus diagnosis with that MRI. They diagnosed me with cauda equina syndrome, which is another horrible situation to deal with on top of the arachnoiditis. I recently had a spine fluid leak this past year. Back in February, I was in a hospital for a week. They did CT and L spine, MRI. I had to be sedated for that because I can't lay still. I'm in so much pain when I lay down. So it was nearly a 3-hour process to get that scan done. And, when I talked to my neurosurgeon, who is a very well-known guy here at OU Medical Center, he consulted with every neurosurgeon on OU's medical staff, and they were all just kind of shaking their head with everything that I deal with. And, I said, have you ever dealt with anybody that had cauda equina syndrome and arachnoiditis? He's like, you're my first. I'm like, hey, another big flag for me, being the one of the only guys.
Wow. What is this? Can you tell me the name of this disease again and tell us what it is?
Cauda equina syndrome is basically at the tail end of the spinal cord is, where all the nerves kind of turn into spaghetti. And with me, I have a pseudomeningocele. So where your spine should narrow to a point, mine opens up. And it's all the pressure of all the fluid, which is, pushing against my fecal sac and giving me that spine fluid leak. And one of the things that, for my benefit, I ended up, while I was in the hospital and we were talking about all my surgical options to go in and fix the leak, I self-healed. The spine fluid leak went away. And so that's been 6 months now. Still no sign of it coming back, thank goodness. But we are prepared with my MR. We have, a surgical plan that we know we're going to get into if I get another leak. We're going to put a shunt in. We're going to reduce the hydrostatic pressure on the spine fluid so that I won't continue to get leaks. Not looking forward to that, but, it's a necessary evil to prevent me from going in and having, back surgery after back surgery to fix the leak.
Yeah. And, this spinal fluid is not something you can mess around with. You got to have it. You got to, if it's leaking, you got to stop it. There's no choice there. Can you talk me through the history of your mobility? I'm curious about, post-injury leading up until, 2010, what was the shape of that? And then post 2010, once the arachnoiditis kicks in, you've mentioned that is progressive. I'm curious what your mobility has looked like in that phase as well.
Yeah. So, right after I got out of the hospital and I got out of the rehab center and I was pushing myself, it was maybe 1985. I did my first 10K.
Wow.
Yeah. See, I grew up an athlete. I did pretty much every sport you could imagine. I ran track, played golf, did baseball. You name it, I tried it. And so I always knew that I was wanting to get back into sports, and I had to have a carrot at the end of my stick to push myself. So doing a 10K was the one thing that I wanted to do. And that's when jogging and running was kind of really starting to make a huge impact in society. So I did my first 10K. It was a walk run. It probably took me over an hour to finish. But you know what? I went from the start line to the finish line. I was very happy that I was able to do that. It was shortly after that I saw a triathlon on TV for the very first time. It was the Hawaiian Ironman. It was 1985. Maybe October, and we just had the Ironman World Championship. It's always in October in Hawaii. So I saw Julie Moss. They did a replay of the 84 Ironman, and Julie's crawling across the line to the finish line. And I could really, really relate to her struggle and everything that she was going through to push herself to that finish line that she had on her agenda that day. And so at that point, I was like, I'm just whimsically going to do a triathlon. So I started training, bought a bike, got my lifeguard certification so that I would have access to a pool. Went to work for a sporting goods organization so I could get cheap gear. And 6 months later, I was standing at the starting line in Ponca City, did my first quarter Ironman, they call it. Now it's called an Olympic distance. And I did not know it at the time, but that's what put me in the history books of triathlon.
Wow.
And I continued after that for many years up until 1990 to do triathlon. But eventually I switched over to cycling. I was better at it. I was faster at it. And during that period between 86 and 90, I was capable of 6-minute miles over a 3 to 4 mile run back then.
Wow.
So yeah, I got most mobility back with my leg, but it was probably maybe 99, I think. I had contracted spinal meningitis, and it was due to the hardware in my back. Yeah, my neurosurgeon, again, to go back to him, he said when he pulled the hardware out, it had a milky coating on it, which was basically just bacteria. So, the meningitis was something that was just waiting to happen. The spine fluid leak was just something waiting to happen because the hardware it was a mess. Poking holes in in the fecal sac. But after that, again, I picked up my golf clubs. I started swinging the clubs again. I started riding. But I could slowly see that I was going downhill. My foot drop, which was what I suffered mainly coming out of that accident, started giving me more problems. Started getting weaker. My legs started getting smaller. I started getting slower. And I just took it as, I'm getting older. I just need to push harder. I need to sleep more and train better. But no, that was the disease slowly taking its toll on me. And that took me up to my diagnosis of 2014.
Yeah. And then post 2014, what's it been like?
Just really trying to figure out how to live with the disease. What I can do, what I can't do, what I should do, what I shouldn't do. It's really a process, and there's not just a recipe for any one individual that deals with this. You just have to find your own way through it. And, some people, they don't make it off the couch. They don't make it out of the bed. I'm that guy from time to time. It all depends on, how bad it is. But it has, it's considered an autoimmune disease. And the thing about autoimmune disease is that when you have one, you'll have another. It's most likely something that you're susceptible with. But, 2014 is when I got off all the medications again, because my pain had gotten to the point where when I was flying coast to coast working for a new medical device company called Mako, which was a robotic device for implants, for like a knee implant. And sitting on the pain just became excruciating. I would have to take my shoe off, and I rarely wear a shoe on my right foot unless I'm walking somewhere or I'm riding. If I sit down, my shoe comes off just because it's so sensitive to the pressure of the shoe. And it just got to the point where it was excruciating. But I knew I had to get into that tube and fly from one place to another. It was just going to be a sufferfest. And, it was shortly after that I ended up having to retire. I took medical disability. I've been retired since 2014. But the benefit of that is that it has allowed me to really work my life the way that I need to, not the way that life forces me to, because I have to go to work and I have to maintain. But yeah, since then, I ride more. I might not go as far or as fast, but I consistently get out on my bike. And I really think that exercise is a huge, huge benefit for anybody dealing with any type of thing that ails them. The endorphins are probably the best painkillers that you're going to get. They're free with the effort that you put in, and they last for quite some time. I wish we could bottle it up,
Yeah. I can sense that, you're someone who recognizes that, hey, I lived, I should have died. The fact that I got any mobility back at all is a gift. Are there times where anger that this happened to you threatened to overwhelm you? Are there times where you have to consciously pull back from getting stuck in that negativity?
Funny you mention that. When my most recent flare-up happened, which was just a few days ago, I was up for maybe 48 hours straight. Nothing was helping with the pain. And, when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and on your second night and you know you're not going to get any sleep. I basically had just gone from laying down to sitting up to standing up, and I dropped the F-bomb. It's just like, ugh, because
Yeah.
you can't not deny that, but it was just, I had to get it out. And once I did, I got up and, I went to my cappuccino maker and I made a quad, and I was up for the day. And, it slowly passed. But, and especially at this time of year, I start getting all jazzed up for the holidays. I love watching the Halloween movies with my kids. We just watched Nightmare Before Christmas not long ago. It's one of my youngest son's favorite movies. And, getting jazzed up for Thanksgiving and especially Christmas and New Year's with my neighbors. And I always have something that I'm looking forward to. And I'm always trying to push my boundaries, because if life is going to put some barrier in front of me, I'll find a way to go over it, under it, through it, or around it, but it's not going to stop me. I might not get to the ultimate goal that I want as a result of trying to get through it, but I will get some formation of it and know that, hey, I'm still capable of pushing myself. So what I've come to understand about this disease is that even when I'm at my worst ever pain, I know it's not going to last forever. It always ends. So I just have to have the wherewithal to get through that moment or those moments, to get on the backside of that, because it's going to be a hill that I have to climb and endure. And then I'll be on the backside and I'll coast down. And, if I get a full night's sleep after being up for 72 or more hours, I'm totally replenished. I look at my bike and I'm like, you and I have a date this afternoon. Or, I go out and do yard work and go take my dog on a walk, anything to push myself, versus thinking, man, just everything that I just went through, I just deserve to sit on the couch. No, it's always going to be, pushing past my level and past my boundary, because that's what makes me happy. I mean, that's what makes me feel good.
Yeah. And speaking of what makes you feel good, what is your pain regimen? And obviously this is different for everyone. This is just an individualized thing for you. But with arachnoiditis, you've mentioned a couple things that are helpful. Something as simple as petting an animal for 30 minutes a day, doing yard work, getting on the bike, getting those endorphins. What are the things that personally work for you that you reach for when you are in pain?
Yeah, so it's occasionally it comes down to cracking a beer, and just sitting back and letting that work in, because ironically enough, a good beer or a swill of whiskey can basically take the edge off. It doesn't eliminate it, but I'm not going to succumb to, that disease as well. But it's, occasionally that'll help. Always on my bicycle, I'll do, I don't know, it's not a rocking number, but maybe 100, 150 miles a week on a good week. Sometimes I do 25 because I just can't handle it. But after I get off the bike, I'm always energized. I always feel good, despite the fact that I might be in pain when I start. And then, of course, prednisone, my doctor has advised me. He's like, look, don't wait until you have a flare up. If you know you're going to have a flare up, take it knowing it's going to precede a storm moving through, so that you can be in that prepared mode, because prednisone takes about 24 hours before you really feel the effects. And as bad as it is on, one, your liver, and two, the fact that if you're on it long term, your body will stop making its own natural prednisone. So there's always that fear that I will become dependent on it. Yeah. So I use it sparingly. If I never know how bad a flare up is going to be, it's always kind of a coin toss. But if I know that I'm in a weakened state entering into when I'm going to have a flare up, that's definitely a time when I'm going to be throwing back a prednisone, and I'll get my maker's mark at the ready. Know that
yeah,
it's going to relax me at some point.
Yeah, you mentioned that what you've gained from this experience has in some ways become your purpose, and I'm curious if you could go back in time and change this and make it not happen to you. Is that something you would consider?
So, a doctor asked me that question. And it was around the time that I was getting my prescription for my wheelchair. And he's like, I know, what you're dealing with is horrible. And, if you could go back, you would change it. And I didn't even hesitate. And I said, absolutely not. I have a great life. I have 2 awesome kids that I love to death. I've been able to accomplish amazing things. I put myself through college, worked my way through after my accident, was the first person in my family to graduate college. And since then, my niece has graduated college. My sister got her bachelor's and got her master's, and she's my older sister, who I'm very proud of. I made history in sport. I have amazing friends and family, and I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, being a triathlete, you have to suffer. It's part of the process of being in that sport. And I've just become really good at suffering. And not the woe is me, not, poor me type suffering. I just know that I can handle a little bit. I mean, suffering on a bike on my worst day is nothing compared to an average day with arachnoiditis. So, I basically lean into it. I don't enjoy the pain. I'm not a masochist by any stretch of the imagination, bring it on. But, I can get through it. Whereas most people, when they start talking about their little aches and pains, this and that, and I just kind of smile. I don't hold it against them. Unlike some people might, oh, my pain is so much worse. It's just like, they know what I go through. They've seen me go through it. And I'm here to set an example for them that, let those little things pass you by. Let them take the back burner and go make the most of the fact that you have a healthy body. And this one thing is going to be short-lived. A broken bone heals in 6 weeks. And then you're back to normal, kind of dealing with things, trying to get through that, learn how to use it after you get that cast off. But don't let it hold you back. I mean, that's just, I don't know. Yeah.
Such a valuable perspective. And as we're talking, I see you have this cross behind you, this beautiful cross. Are you a man of faith, and is that something that has helped you get through all of this?
Yeah, I would say probably more spiritual. I was raised in a Pentecostal church, not the one where you're taking up serpents or anything along that line. Sought out church when I was a kid, went to a Baptist church that was close to my neighborhood. And most recently, I'm in the Lutheran faith. But there again, with my disease, I can go on a Sunday and sit in the very back pew and suffer, and people watch me suffer. And I think there's a quote in the Bible. In fact, it was Mark Wahlberg who played Father Stu, which is a great movie, by the way. If you haven't seen it, watch it. And in this line, and I'll probably get the quote wrong, but he said, I'm never closer to my God than when I'm suffering, because Christ suffered on the cross for us, right? And I figure if he can suffer with nails through his hands and his feet, with a crown thorn and vinegar water and, a spear in his side, what little I have to deal with is nothing by comparison. But it puts me closer to him in that respect because of what he went through for us.
Wow. Well, Steve, it's been so amazing talking to you today. What an incredible story. There's so many things that you said today where it's unbelievable that you've made it through. And it's unbelievable that you have this, that you exude this joy, this aura of goodwill, which is amazing and so powerful. And you've lived through some horrible things. And you're a real survivor. And I love what you said about, you're good at being in pain. So I'm going to ask you a different last question than I normally ask, because this is the Major Pain Podcast. And, most people that listen to this are probably in pain of some kind or another. How do you get good at being in pain? What is your process? What is your secret? How do you get good at this thing that we are all living with and living through?
Man, I've lived with it almost since day one. I was abused by my father, who ended up abandoning our family when I was 4. So it basically started back then. We had a very hard scrabble life. We were poor growing up. Most of the time, our cabinets were empty as opposed to filled with food. So I learned how to get around, being hungry at night and watching my mom suffer, trying to provide for 2 kids on her own on a secretary's income in the 60s. I watched my grandfather work hard and deal with it. And, life has heaped so much on me early on. I had my accident when I was 20. So I've basically been in pain every day of my life since I was 20 years old, 42 years. At some point, you either get good at it or you succumb to it. And, I've just always found that I have such an inner strength and the desire to push through and be better and not be one of those people that sits on the sideline just wanting people to pity them. That's the last thing I want in life. So I push through all that, hoping that I'll come across one person that needs inspiration on that one day that our paths cross, and I can share my story, or they can see what I'm going through and see that I can put a smile on my face, as you've said. And, that's the purpose. That's the reason for everything that I've been through. I truly, truly, honestly believe that my story is going to touch many more lives than I'll ever know. And I hope for that, but I don't look for the recognition as much as I just look to make that happen.
Wow. Well, I'm honored to be able to be a part of amplifying your story. I'm honored to be able to share your story on this platform, to have it live here with the other incredible stories on this podcast. Thank you so much for reaching out and for coming on the show. Just an incredible episode today. Is there anything that you'd like to plug? Anything online, social media, websites, anything at all that you'd like to direct our listeners towards?
Yeah, people can follow me on Instagram. I do quite a bit on Instagram. I'm trying to get a little bit better. It's SP Lovelace, Stephen Paul Lovelace, SP Lovelace as my Instagram handle. I'll have a book coming out at some point. Would love to circle back when I get that and talk to you about it. And let me just say that this has been such a refreshing break from the podcast that I've done in the past. I don't normally like to talk about my pain and my ills that I go through. Most of the other interviews I've done have been about, my sporting career and my place in sports history. So I talk about that, and I do talk about my disease and things, but, you can only hold so much in for so long. And sometimes it's comforting to find somebody that is on the same page with you from a disease or the pain that they're going through. And when they say misery loves company, I mean that in a good way, because, it's through some of those conversations that I find out things that have helped them that I try that are beneficial to me eventually. And, it's not that you're just there to data dump on all the misery that you're going through, as much as, hey, look, this works. And if I can inspire you to push yourself, so much the better. So
yeah.
This has been great.
That means so much to me, and that's foundational to what this show is all about. And, I've been hosting this show for a while, and every once in a while I'll tell someone about it, and their response will be, why do you do that? That sounds horrible. Like, why do you have a podcast where you just talk about what hurts, But for me, it's so healing and cathartic every single week. Every single person I talk to be able to talk about this thing that I felt like was a secret because society didn't want to hear about it. And I felt like I had to keep it locked up to not make other people uncomfortable. And when it is a foundational part of who you are, and, that's a complicated thing to say, because we don't want to be our illness, but our illness is a part of us. And to deny it is to deny a piece of yourself. And in my experience, integrating it has been so important to me. And it's not who I am, but it's a piece of me, and it's a huge piece of my story, And to not be able to share that with anyone is so isolating and terrible, and it makes it worse. So that's what I love about doing this. To me, there's nothing depressing about talking about it at all. It's healing, and it's something that I'm so excited to be able to share with other people. And to talk to you today just means so much to me. And whoever's listening, if this conversation has impacted them in a positive way, that means so much to me. And, I love it. I just love it so much.
Well, the paradigm shift between the way things used to be and the way they are now, and this podcast is one of those things that is at the pinnacle of that. They used to institutionalize people like me.
Yeah.
Right. But I was in so much pain and I could do nothing. And rather than have him out in society where, he's going to draw attention, let's put him in the institute. Let's let them deal with that type of people. You know what? We're all that type of people at some point or another.
Yes.
But like you said, it's cathartic when you cross paths with somebody that knows what suffering is like, to actually talk about it, not to be miserable as much as just to we have a common thing in life. And sometimes that's hard to find and especially to discuss.
Yeah. And there's so much good that comes from it. And you're the perfect example of that, a life lived without suffering, it's going to be hard to be happy because you have to be challenged and you have to experience unhappiness to know what happiness is and to even learn how to pursue joy. I am such a happier person now than I was before my illness. So it's something that I'm grateful for in that strange way, just like you when you say that you wouldn't change it. Well, wow. I'm getting emotional. This has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Steve. I appreciate it so, so much.
Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Major Pain. I'm Jesse Mercury, your host and the producer of this podcast. Artwork by Egg Salad Salad. Our theme music is the song Time Machine from my synth-pop album Sci-Fi, now streaming everywhere. Support this show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast. If you have questions or comments you'd like to share with myself, our guests, or our listeners, send an email to majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about this show, support its creation, or comment on any episode at majorpainpodcast.com. Major Pain is supported by our listeners on Patreon. Thank you to our $2 per month supporters, our $7 per month patrons Naomi Adele Smith, Sonny Roberts, Kelsey Matson, Alexandria Henderson, Justin Minnick, Laura Stevens, Heather Muncie, and Robert, and our $25 per month producers Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Learn how you can support this podcast while receiving special recognition on the show, gifts, and monthly bonus episodes at patreon.com/majorpainpodcasts.